everyone, and welcome back to The Basics, a series where we have honest conversations about mental health. And in this episode, we're talking about self injury and more specifically, coping alternatives and helpful things to say or do when someone is dealing with self injury. But first, introductions are in order because we do have a new face. As you may know or recognize me from our last video, I'm Kayla. I've been here at Tualoha on and off since 2018. And if we're talking about dogs, books, traveling, concerts, then we'll probably become friends pretty quick. And I know me and our guest Chad have become friends over some of those few things, and I'm going to give him an opportunity to introduce himself.
Hey, Kayla. Hey, Internet. My name is Chad, and I spent the last 16 years serving to write Love on Our Arms, mostly out on the road. So, been traveling all over God's green earth. And while out on the road, I've had the opportunity to really elevate my palate in terms of spice. I love spicy food. In fact, if there's one that I have to sign a waiver for, just go ahead and serve that to me. Other things about me. Even though we probably haven't met, your dog is likely my best friend, and I have no reservations about admitting that.
So today we're talking about self-injury. Not just like the most super light and fun topic, but I know you're coming to the table with some lived experience and some personal perspective, which I think our audience is really going to appreciate. Just from my end, as we're getting started, for anyone who feels like they're maybe on a base level of understanding about this topic, wanted to touch on a little bit what is self-injury and why people do it. So at its core, self-injury is a coping mechanism that arises for lots of people when they feel the need for a physical release of pain or pent-up emotions. A lot of times it arises when a person needs to feel in control in a chaotic environment. And this behavior often starts early, with the average onset being around 12 to 14. For some people, self-injury may only happen a few times. It may be like a one-off instance. But for a lot of people, it becomes a habitual experience. And many people in recovery kind of consider the urge to self-harm to be an addiction. So I'm kind of curious, from your personal experience and insight, or maybe even just how you prefer to talk about it, how would you describe self-injury?
Yeah, I think self-injury is well. This what brought me to the table of to write Love on Our Arms. That was the first thing that was present in the original story that got us started. That really felt like it was an area of common ground, and specifically when I was first reading the story, I was several months into recovery from self-injurious behavior, and I was really struck by the posture of the story, the idea that people could talk about this thing in a bold way and talk about it not in a sense of like retrospect, like this was my story years and years ago, but rather this is something that we're still kind of figuring out in real time. And, over the 16 years that I've served this organization, I've seen the conversation around self-injury really grow and mature, but there still is a ton of stigma surrounding it. When someone kind of imagines a poster child of self-injury, it's kind of what you listed, likely someone that identifies or presents as female, likely someone in early adolescence or early teenage years. And for me, I have not been those things. And that was not my context of how self-injury came into my life. I was a late bloomer, as it was. I was in my early 20s when I was really struggling with self-injury. And I remember initially in my recovery trying to do research on this behavior that I was starting to leave behind. And I remember some of these first publications on the behavior would lead off saying the self-injurer is a teen girl. And I'm like, man, like
We're
that
really
feels
assuming a lot
extra
here.
alienating. Like I'm already
Yeah.
dealing right. Like I'm already dealing with this highly shameful, highly stigmatized thing. And as I'm trying to learn more, I'm realizing maybe I'm more of an aberration than I ever realized. Fortunately, that did not derail my recovery, but that really pointed to there was so much more to learn. That self-injury really goes beyond the behavior, but the behavior can be so shocking to people that that's what gets the attention rather than what the behavior is trying to remedy.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times too, when you're reading that research that feels so like definitive, it's almost like people find comfort in feeling like they know. Like, well, I know a teen girl who's 14. Like, if I can just know that this is the person that needs help or this is the person I can pay attention to, it brings like a sense of comfort. But unfortunately, it's false comfort because then not only may you not be looking in the right places, but you may be actively ignoring someone who really needs help because they're not fitting um, this preconceived definition.
Yeah, yeah, I think it's really interesting you bring that up because it's really working from two angles on the same core principle, the same foundational problem at play here. So you're talking about someone that's trying to wrap their head around the behavior, maybe someone that is compassionate, that's trying to help, but they feel like there's this barrier, right? That they can't help until they fully understand. And as we seek to understand, we are
Right.
limiting what we believe this behavior to be, what it's trying to accomplish, who may be struggling, where they may be struggling. So they're trying to assert a level of control, like you mentioned, over this kind of obscure, this unfamiliar territory. And in so many
Mhm.
ways, at least in my experience, that was what I was trying to do with self injury, that this was not a cry for help. This was not an act of suicidal self destruction. This was me trying to come to terms with a world that felt wildly out of control around me. You know, to put our psychological hats on, behavioral analyst hats on, the term that's most widely accepted for self injury is non suicidal self injury. And
Right.
oftentimes, you know, the more inclusive and more encompassing definitions will say that self injury is an act uh, with the desire, with the goal of emotional self regulation. Look,
Mhm.
emotional self regulation is a good thing. It is good to be
Right.
able to see where we can accurately measure our barometers of stimulus and how we can meet those or how we can retreat from those. And self injury works in much the same way, that this is a maladaptive opportunity and attempt to find a neutral setting again.
Right. I've heard the phrase before that a lot of people kind of jump back at when they first hear it, but it's people self injure because self injury works. Um, it does do what you
Yeah.
said. However, there is the downside of, or in the teaching opportunity of, it works, and so do other things. And we can find something that doesn't
Yeah.
have to hurt you physically in the process. And so, a lot of recovery from self injury is identifying what that is for an individual person. What are those alternatives? How do we cope with all these things going on around us? Because in a dream world, just get rid of the things that are making us emotionally unregulated, the things that are making our environment chaotic. Like, man, if we could just snap our fingers and that be gone, maybe the problem would minimize significantly. But that is a dream world and not reality. So, how do we cope? We can't just make these things go away. How do we cope? And I'm kind of curious what that looked like for you. What was your initial in your initial healing and your initial recovery, what were kind of the first things that you found helpful as an alternative?
Oh man. Um, so just to back up a little bit, you said this really poignant idea that self injury is problematic because on some level it works. Same way,
Right.
you know, with substances. There's if substances didn't create a desired effect, then we wouldn't have a problem. But on some
Right.
level, these behaviors are efficient, and in other ways, you're that's only true if you are looking at it in the most microscopic way. If you zoom out, there's a context that happens before the self-injurious behavior and a context that happens after, and both of those, it's like, you know, a relief sandwich, but the bread is shame, right? So
Yeah.
you are feeling this shameful experience and you are seeking a release from it, and you get that release, and then the dust settles a bit, and you're just trapped in a bit more shame, a bit more isolation. I realized over time that I was really really bad, at being a good narrator to my own story. I did not have a proper perspective on a lot of the chaos that I found myself in, and realized that there were way more opportunities for grace, and way more opportunities for um, really just for other people to be a part of my equation.
Yeah.
I know we're kind of dovetailing here. I just saw this meme on Instagram the other day. It went by the if you're happy and you know, clap your hands kind of thing, but it kept
Uh-huh.
going on as a run on. Maybe you've seen it, Kayla. It's like if you grew up getting praise from adults and when you were young and you were told that you were special, and now you don't know how to adapt to the world around you because the world doesn't see you as that special, and you don't know how to deal with the anxiety around being underperforming in this culture, and it keeps going on, and you see this person like ready to clap their hand with like every
Right. Just holding
every
it.
clause that comes out. And that was so much of it. And I know like it's a meme because a lot of people relate to it. It went viral because
Right.
people were like, wow, I see myself in that. And that was so much of kind of the water that I was swimming in, that I thought my role was figuring out life by myself, being fully autonomous, having all the answers, that my value was placed in uh, the the answers that I could give to you or my residents or my friends or you name it. And when I found myself over a period of days, months, and almost a year of being completely without answers, I had to find new ways to ground myself, to, in some ways, it felt like kind of self punishing behavior, that I was a disappointment. And, and therein, this kind of cycle of self um, identifying and living out this shame that no one else could see. That my self
Hmm.
injury was for me. I went through very meticulous steps to make sure that no one found this out, and over time realized just how isolated I had become. Because there were other nights I had other ways of self-regulating, through alcohol, through other substances, but those were often playing out in a more social field. Um, that probably felt more like a cry for help than my self-injury ever
Yeah.
was. But so I think kind of the first step towards my recovery, towards leaving that behavior, was acknowledging just how alone I was, having to face that. And that was terrifying. Um,
Yeah.
and I remember the first night of my first attempt at long term cessation of the behavior. I was coming home from a party, walking home alone, and realizing that I'd already kind of made this commitment to myself that I was going to injure that night. And I I I realized that maybe there was a way out, and I didn't know what that way out looked like. But I just kind of went with my gut, and I called my friend. In this case, this is my friend Blake, and Blake picked up the phone, and I said, "Blake, I need you to do me a favor and ask no questions. I just need you to say, Chad, don't do it." And he's like, "All right, Chad, don't do it." I said, "Blake, say it again." He goes, "Chad, don't do it." I said, "One more time." He said, "Chad, please don't do it." And I said, "All right, thanks, man. I'll see you tomorrow." And, I remember wanting to kind of allay his fears that there was nothing that was going to be permanent about this, what was
Right.
coming next.
Mhm.
That I wanted to clearly express, like, I'm going to see you tomorrow. I'm good. I was trying to come up with cover stories on like when he asks one day, what was that thing that he was telling me not to do?
Simon says,
What's my cover story? And true enough, yeah, right. But Blake was super loyal to this, and it wasn't for years later, when I was years into my recovery, I told him, how much that call meant to me that night, and he says, I hope you know that I was never going to ask what that was about.
mhm.
I just trusted that what you needed from me, I would give, um, and yeah, so that was kind of step one, was I guess imagining that there was a way out. Um, maybe finding some sense of humility that I don't have the answers even to my own pain, that maybe there's an external voice that can help, that maybe I don't have to sort this out all by myself. Now that, that period of time of being without self-injury, that was not the last time that I injured, but that was certainly like the cornerstone in building this new kind of fortress of self-care,
Yeah.
which required someone else to lean on. I'd say that the other piece, the time that it really stuck, the last time I injured, I did not think that was going to be the last time I injured.
Mm.
And I remember specifically the context of this. This was almost 17 years ago. Like, this is the season in which
Wow.
I stopped, and I had gone home to visit family for the Easter holidays, and took a break from school to left a couple days early, and I'd injured probably just 2 days before making this trip. And I get down to my family's place, and I'm searching through my luggage, and I realized that I packed the wrong watch band. I used to have a super thick watch band that would hide where I would injure, and I just that wave of shame just hit so heavily. Like, am I going to be found out? Like,
Mm-hmm.
is this where I become an even greater disappointment to my friends and family? So I was hyper aware of where my hands were that entire trip, just to make sure that no one saw my wounds. And
Mm.
that the next Sunday comes, and I'm sitting next to my toddler nephews in church, and I get this realization that my oldest nephew, Caleb, he was probably 2 or almost 3 at the time. I'm like, man, like I love this kid so much. And I notice, like, he looks over at my arm at one point, and there's no way that this kid understands like what a wound is, certainly not what behavioral health is, certainly not what self-injury is. But
Right.
I was very quick to cover my arms, and I realized, I got some options here. I can either continue with this behavior, and one day this kid's going to be old enough to ask. And when he asks, will I be courageous enough to tell him what's going on, or will I lie to this kid? Like, at what level do the scales balance between lying to this kid and protecting him from this world of pain that's existing inside me? And then I realized maybe there's another way. Maybe I can walk away from this. Maybe I can find a way to cope without needing to be destructive. And and I had an opportunity just 2 years ago to tell Caleb how instrumental he was in my first steps towards recovery. And it's interesting that, like, in that case, shame is not just a binary thing. It's not like just shame bad, but in this case, shame
Mm-hmm.
was a motivator to find something else. Now, I'm not saying anyone should be stuck in cycles of shame. That's a dangerous place to be. However, I think that there are ways that even so-called negative emotions and negative experiences can be stepping off points to something that
Yeah.
is more healing, more inclusive, more buttressing of our own lives and stories and sense of
Yeah. I
self.
mean, shame is not a good thing to feel. Like, whether you're putting a negative label on it or not, it's something you want to escape from. You don't want to feel that shame anymore. So that totally makes sense. Like you said, it can be easy to use that shame as a weapon, to continue to spiral into more shame, be ashamed that you feel shameful. And I'm so ashamed of how much shame I'm experiencing. And it can just not be a great time. But like you said, it is a feeling that you want to escape.
Yeah, well, there's a difference between the things that we feel and how we react to the things that we feel, right?
Right.
This is the whole reason Inside Out is such a hit. That emotions are things that happen to you. Sometimes I
Mm,
feel like they're happening at you, uh, but we get to learn how we respond to these
yeah,
different feelings. We get to learn how we interpret certain feelings, and we certainly get to learn how we share certain feelings.
yeah. So when you're talking about your healing and recovery, something is sticking out to me that I think is super interesting. You mentioned how self-injury was a very personal thing for you, and it was something that you hid from others, you didn't want others to know about. Um, However, ironically enough, people, when I asked you what was your coping mechanism, or how did you start to replace these behaviors, both of the instances that you've brought up have been people, your friend and your nephew. And so I'm kind of interested for those out there who are listening, who are saying, I'm worried about someone that I love, whether because they can blatantly see or have evidence that this person is hurting themselves, or they're just suspicious that this person is hurting themselves. What do
Yeah.
you think that they can do from your perspective to be a helpful support?
Hmm. Oh man. I'd say first and foremost, and this is so hard, I imagine, specifically for parents and guardians, and intimate partners of people that struggle with self injury. I think the if this is the first conversation that you're going to have regarding this behavior, uh, do your homework. That doesn't mean getting all the facts down, but do your emotional homework. Walk through the conversation imaginatively before you sit down to have the first conversation, in a way that looks like desensitizing yourself to any knee jerk reactions to the behavior or to the visuals or to some of the hard things that you're probably going to hear. The reality is, the problem here is not the self injury. That's just the maladaptive uh, um, attempt to make sense of something that is way deeper. For me,
Yeah.
it went to the core of my identity. I was terrified that I was someone that wasn't worthy of the opportunities and the attention and really any good thing that I ever got. So I was kind of constructing walls against that. All that to say, I've seen some really beautiful ways of how people have constructed these conversations, and some really well intentioned, but ultimately disappointing ways. I'll go to my story on the disappointing way. I was a couple years into recovery when I decided to tell my parents about what was
Mm,
going on, and I had one parent who uh, was curious and empathetic and asking this. This was a question that was very helpful. Said, are you good now? Are you okay now?
mm,
How can I help you be better? And I had another parent who, with a posture of wanting to provide a sense of protection, their response was it my fault?
mm.
And I would be like, no, like this isn't about you.
Right.
And I can look back now and see that the desire was to ensure that I was protected from anything else that would threaten my well-being, even if it included their role in my
Mhm,
life. And but in the moment, that wasn't what I needed. I didn't need an escalation. I didn't need someone to come ready to fight. I needed something that felt calm. And
mhm,
thankfully, I was in recovery for a while, and so I had like that toolkit built up. And I did my homework too. I realized that when I shared this, that I was probably going to get a couple different reactions from the parties at play here. It wasn't, that smart idea did not evolve from my own brain. This came from people that I've been able to kind of bounce ideas off of, and counselors and other yeah, kind of mentors in my life. But so I'd say there was nothing necessarily bad about the words in that response, but it was the posture of the response. I'm sharing something about my life, and all of a sudden it turns around to, but was it my fault? And I'm like, I'm not here
well,
to
because then
to divvy out faults,
it's
right?
gone
Like,
from asking for help to now I have to comfort you, almost like now I feel like this
Right,
conversation is a
right,
little
right.
derailed.
On the flip side of that, out on the road, I've seen people really embody some incredibly gracious attitudes and actions towards people that they love that struggle with self injury. And I remember this one woman telling me about her daughter's friend who, for whatever reason, she was the only adult in this young woman's life that she felt comfortable opening up to. Um, and because this woman was a nurse, she offered help. She said, "Hey, honey, I noticed that you got some wounds. Can I help you clean those up?"
Mm.
And they had talked about self injury before. This wasn't the first conversation, but what a gracious attitude of saying, "There's no threat of punishment here. Just
Right.
um, hey, I'm here for you." Um, and maybe one day we can get past this, but with where you are right now, I want to make sure that you are taken care of to the best of my ability to care for you. Is it okay if I help you? And that's, from a medical perspective, that is a super kind thing to do. That this harm doesn't have to have a super extended shelf life. That there are ways to mitigate, what a scar would look like, or if there's any risk of infection. In many ways, it kind of plays into conversations of harm reduction that we've seen across North America regarding substance use, and
Right.
how different professionals and different compassionate people have stepped up to say, I can't change how you are interacting with the world, but I can certainly determine how I'm interacting with you. And
Yeah.
uh, so if my posture is one of increasing shame or one of reminding you, being a broken record of hope, of being a broken record of just proving that you're not going to be able to push me away. I'm here for you in whatever way you need. Um, but in all of this, I think your conversations with someone need to be grounded in reality. Have they let you in to this part of your life? No one wants to be outed. No one wants to feel like you've been reading their mail. And then also, I think it's important to realize that you modeling vulnerability is going to allow someone else to dip their toe into those waters. I didn't
Yeah.
need
And
someone that
you're
had all
doing
the
that right
answers,
now.
because I was at a point in my life that I didn't believe. Yeah, I didn't believe that there were answers to be found anywhere. So I wasn't going to be soothed by someone that could fix me with a bumper sticker, right? Uh, so I think what would have been more helpful for me is someone sharing their own journey, sharing their own story, sharing their own failures, sharing their own self doubts, and that giving me a chance to say, hey, actually, kind of me too with this. So, yeah, you don't need to have all the answers, but I think helping someone develop the vocabulary to ask um, more questions is probably the best way that we go about this. Not, I'm going to tell you how to leave self injury, but asking, hey, what could I do to help you next time you feel this pent up emotion, to find a more peaceful and invitational way to take some steps forward together.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the helpfulness of vulnerability, and also just want to double down on thanking you for being willing to be vulnerable, and not just now, but in the work you do on the road and the work you do for Tuloha. It it's huge to have someone sit across from you who can say, I know what it's like to be there. I know that it feels so shameful, so impossible, so insert adjective here, but I'm here and I get it. And so before we wrap up, I did just want to give you space and a little bit of opportunity. If there's anyone watching who is actively struggling with self harm, doesn't really know where to go from here, if there's anything that you'd like to say to them, advice, literally anything, it's all yours.
Yeah, I'd say you you're not a mystery. You're not something to be solved. You are doing the best you can with what you have, and there's more to know. Um, you've been put in situations that have like radically outpaced the tools given to you, and that's not your fault. Um, I can say, the same words that were told to me, that we can make it through this together, that this isn't on you to figure out. You're going to find that, that setting certain goals can be helpful, and you're going to find that setting certain goals can be absolutely daunting. Actually, going back to my first several months at To Write Love, I was able to have a conversation with a friend and who was pretty fresh into their recovery, and I asked them, "Hey, do you have a plan to stay injury free forever?" And they said, "I mean, that's kind of unfair. Forever is a long time, but
Yeah.
I think I can make it through today."
Mm-hmm.
And that's all that we're asking is, not even that you make it through today as if there's a reward setting on the other side of it, because there's going to be
Right.
days that you get through it without injuring, and it's going to be the hardest damn thing that you've ever done. But know that you can do the hardest damn thing you've ever done in the company of other people.
Yeah.
And to whatever degree To Write Love can be a source of proof of those other people, check out our blog, check out the podcast, check out this YouTube series, check out some friends, check out some of our resources on the site, and to whatever degree you need something deeper, something that feels a bit more approachable and responsive. Check us out on social media, write us an email, leave a post. We read and respond to everything that comes in. And we want you to know that we see you. We want you to know that where you are today is just a starting point, that you're not trapped. You're not stuck. You are not your pain. You are not what you're currently working through. And we can't wait to see this journey of self-discovery unfold. And we're honored to be a piece of that.
Absolutely. Ditto to everything Chad said as a TWA employee. And if you're looking for some easy access to those things that he mentioned, the blog, the podcast, our social media links, all of that can be found in the description below. So just want to take a second and say thank you for joining us, Chad. If you're wondering, we will be back with another episode very soon. We'll be joined by Becky, Kat, and Cody again, talking about our mental health journeys, where they started, and kind of the origins of mental health in our life. And as always, again, echoing what Chad said, you don't have to do this alone. You deserve support. We have resources. We're here to listen, and we want to help. And before you head out, we'd really appreciate it if you liked, commented, subscribed, shared this video. The more interaction that you give, the more this video can be shown to people who need it. Thank you for being here, and we'll see you again soon.